have a ranch just south of town here, so we come a couple of times and visit them. So anyway, it's good to be here. We've driven through Stephenville, but I've never visited your campus, and so I want to thank everyone for inviting me and having this opportunity to share my story. When I was your age, and I was talking to the students now, at your age in college, there wasn't a space program. I grew up in South Carolina, decided I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. My dad had been in the Navy during World War II, and so I went to the Naval Academy, and while I was there, I fell in love with airplanes. So I decided back then you could go in the Air Force. There wasn't any Air Force Academy. So I had a choice of Air Force flight time or Navy flying. And when I got my physical last year, the doctor said, Benjamin Duke, you don't qualify for naval aviation, but the Air Force will take you. So I went in the Air Force, and probably the best decision that I ever made. And I graduated in 1957 from the Naval Academy, and was in flight school in that September '57 when the Sputnik went up. It was the first satellite that Russian orbited the Earth. And it was, to me, the beginning of the space age. And as a result of that, I went through flight school. I graduated, got my wings at Webb Air Force Base down at Big Spring. And then I went to, after that, went to Germany for 3 years. And in 1961, the first human beings went into space. Yuri Gagarin was the first person in space, a Russian cosmonaut, then followed by Alan Shepard. And I wasn't, I was just a fighter pilot, I didn't even have an idea that I would one day be an astronaut. Well, I went to Germany, and as I said, in 1961, we had these flights, and right after Alan Shepard landed, President Kennedy announced that we're going to go to the moon by the end of 1969, and we're going to land on the moon, and we'll be off and running. Well, I thought he was crazy, Back in those days, most of the rockets were 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blow up rather than lift off. And so it wasn't a very likely idea that we would do it. But 8 years and 2 months later, I'm sitting in mission control talking to Neil Armstrong when he landed on the moon. And it was one of the most amazing, to me, one of the most amazing engineering feats that we've ever undertaken in this country. And so we powered up, if you will, and in 8 years and 2 months, we landed on the moon. In spite of a fire that killed the crew of Apollo 1 in 1967, January '67. Back then was a pretty tough time in the astronautics. We had 4 guys get killed in airplane accidents. We had 1 get killed in a car accident, and 3 got killed in the fire at Apollo 1, which sent NASA back, the Apollo program back 2 years. Took 2 years to fix these problems and get airborne again. But in spite of all of that, we had a desire to get to the moon, and I gotten selected. I went to MIT after my trip to Germany. My assignment to Germany. I went to MIT, and I met some astronauts there while I was working on the Apollo guidance and navigation system. And and I've never met anybody who was so excited about their job as these guys. I said, how did I get that job? And they said, get your degree, go to test pilot school, and you might have a chance. So I followed their advice, got my degree from MIT, got a master's in 1964. It was, yeah. And And so we moved to Edwards Air Force Base in California, the test pilot school. And once I got through that, I was working in test pilot school for 2 months when I read an article in the paper that said, NASA's looking for astronauts, please apply. And so I was qualified. And so I applied, and in April 1966, I was selected as one of 19 astronauts, and we started our training. We moved to Houston, started our training, and there were 9, during Apollo, we had 9 missions to the moon, and there were 6 successful landings. So we had 12 of us, 2 astronauts per landing. So there were 12 of us that walked on the moon. I was the youngest by about 4 months. And Apollo's over, of course, a long time ago. And NASA keeps saying I'm the youngest guy on the moon. Well, I'm 89 years old, and I'm still the youngest guy to walk on the moon. Is our next program. We're going to land people on the moon, not going to say man anymore, but astronauts on the moon in the next couple of years, I hope. So they're working hard at it. So before I die, maybe somebody younger than me will land on the moon. So anyway, so we got there, got to NASA, and and it was a real problem with all of these people getting killed, of course. And it set us back a couple of years, as I mentioned. And so we got ready to fly, and the first flight to the moon was Apollo 8, which was on Christmas Eve, 1968. And it was probably the most dangerous mission that NASA undertook with astronauts. We launched on the Saturn V, which is the big rocket you saw here a minute ago. And there was, once they left for the moon, there was no backup. It had to work, or they were going to be dead. So, but they said, we'll take the chance, and we're going to beat the Russians to the moon. So they orbited the moon Christmas Eve, 1968. And they had a picture, a TV show, if you will, and watch the Earth rise from behind the moon. Beautiful jewel of blue and white, and land was all brown. And they started reading from Genesis, and they read the first 11 verses of chapter 1 of Genesis, which was, to me, probably the most moving words that came back from the moon, except for Neil Armstrong's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So we were off and running. It was a successful mission. First mission that I had was involved with was Apollo 10, and Apollo 10 we took the lunar module to the moon, but it couldn't land, and but we checked it all out, and it was the mission profile was correct. And so the next mission, 2 months later, by the way, I was in mission control talking to the crew when they were in orbit around the moon. It's called, and mission control, the only person that can talk to the crew is called CAPCOM, which stands for Capsule Communicator. And so I was there for that mission. And so right after that, Neil Armstrong said, well, hey, Charlie, you did it for them. Why don't you do it for me? And so I was asked to be on Capcom for Apollo 11, which was, I wouldn't even thought of that idea, but Neil wanted me to do it, so I said, yes, sir. And we trained for 2 months to get ready to go. And the mission was going really, really well until they started the descent and to the moon. It took about 12 minutes, if I remember. And then the wheels started coming off, if you will. And we had computer overloads. Our Apollo computer had 85 85K memory. Let that sink in. And an 85K memory, the gals at MIT who wrote the software put 6 programs in an 85K memory. And it all worked. And so they were started down, and we had a switch in the wrong place. And so as Buzz Aldrin, he put the rendezvous radar on, and the computer was looking for where's the information from that, and it was called an overload. But it was still flying the vehicle, so we continued our descent. And then we had several other problems, communication problems, and then trajectory problems. And Neil couldn't land where we had him targeted, and so we flew over, and that used up all the gas, extra gas. And so now we're minimum fuel, and mission control, I called 60 seconds. That means they had 60 seconds to land on the moon, but we were going to call it abort. Then I called 30 seconds, and I started my stopwatch. And at 13 seconds later, I heard contact, engine stop. So we knew they were on the ground. And with 12 seconds before an abort call, 17 seconds or so before we were to call abort, they landed. Now, I'm convinced that if we'd have gotten to 0 and I said, Eagle, abort, say again, Houston, they were going to land that vehicle. I don't care what mission control was saying. He was going to land. He was 30 feet off the moon, and we say abort. Well, he's got 4% fuel remaining, but he can remain, so he landed. And a tremendous release, mission control, and the tension was really through the roof. So we had that first landing, and then we had Apollo 12 land. I was backup crew on Apollo 13, and it blew up on the way to the moon. We had liquid oxygen in the service module, which supplied the oxygen for the fuel cells, which gives you electricity and the drinking water. And so when it blew up, they were just dead in the water, and basically they were in deep trouble. And, but we all rallied and got them safely returned, which was a feat of mission control. In every Apollo flight, we had some big problem show up, and mission control saved the day. They were, to me, the heroes of Apollo, because without mission control, we would have lost the crew on Apollo 13. We wouldn't have landed on our flight. We had a 6-hour delay landing because of the problem we had with the other spacecraft, and mission control couldn't fix our problem, but we got our workaround. So we can't fix it, but this is what is wrong, and you can use this for a backup, and you're clear to go land. So it was the last revolution that we could land because the moon was slowly rotating out from under us, and or the trajectory, and we couldn't. The last landing, last revolution, where we could have gotten back to our landing spot was late when we landed. So we had John Young and I were the 5th landing on the moon, so I was number 10 to get out, we stood, there were no seats in the lunar module, so we were standing there all suited up with our life support systems on, and the hatch you got out was right between us. And so I reached down and opened the hatch, and the door swung this way, so I'm trapped behind the hatch. He's got to get out first, so he gets out. And then I close the hatch and open it up, and I get out. And you got on your hands and knees, and you crawled out backwards onto the porch and then down the ladder. And so I was the 10th guy to step onto the moon, and it was exciting, let me tell you. It was a we landed in the highlands of the moon. So as you look at the moon, we were almost in the middle of the full moon. And it was actually, it looked like a half moon when we landed. So a day on the moon from sunrise to sunset is 2 weeks. So the sun moves very slowly, and when we landed, the sun was back and back, and it came up, and 2 days later, 3 days later, we left, 72 hours later, and it was still back in the east. As the sun gets higher, the surface gets hotter and hotter, but the space suit protects you from that heat. The problem in an Apollo spacesuit is body heat. If you start working and you got to get rid of the body heat. If our cooling system went out in that suit, we had 30 minutes before heat stroke. So you got really hot in this suit without a cooling system. But we had this basically radiator deal. It was a set of long underwear with tubes wrapped around the legs and the body and the arms. It was filled with water. You plugged it into the inside of the suit, turned on the pump, and you pump water through this underwear. And picked up the body heat, took it up to the backpack, flashed it off into space. So that's what kept us cool. We were the second flight for the rover. There's a training pictures here, and one of my experiments that I had to do on the moon was drilling a hole into the moon 10 feet deep. And so we practiced and practiced and practiced so that we would have it right. And I was working on this experiment, drilling this hole on the moon when John Young was around what we call it the central station, and he pulled the electrical plug away. And so we lost that experiment, but it's the only one that we lost during the whole stay on the moon. When we landed on the moon and we got outside for the first time, we were supposed to land and get out right away with the flight plan, but due to the 6-hour delay, they said, no, you guys are going to be too tired. We want you to go to sleep. And can you imagine? 4 hours after you land on the moon, go to sleep. And so we took off our suits and put up our hammocks and tried to get some sleep. And I just couldn't get to sleep. And so I said, Houston, I'm taking a sleeping pill. And so I got about 4 hours sleep that night. We got back out and suited up and went outside for our first time. The moon was mostly gray in color, had shades of gray. Some rocks were solid black and some were individual rocks and some were white, but mostly it was just sort of shades of gray. And we landed in the mountains of the moon, and to the left was a mountain that looked like Stone Mountain in Georgia, just a big dome. And that was our objective on the second day. And so that was called Stone Mountain. You look out to the west, since there's no atmosphere on the moon, it's just very clear. And you can see very sharply on the horizon, and you look up, and there is just the blackness of space. Everybody says, what did the Earth look like from the moon? Well, when I was standing on the moon, I couldn't see the Earth. It was right overhead. And I look up, and you're looking at the top of your helmet in Apollo. So I had to hold on to the car and arch my back and look up. And there was the Earth right overhead. It was a half Earth. It's a beautiful jewel just been there. The moon was really incredibly beautiful to me. Barren, never any life up there. There's no dirt on the moon. It's just rock, pulverized rock. So everywhere you walked, you left your footprints. You could never get lost on the moon because all you had to do is turn around and follow your tracks back. And that was in the car too. And we drove the farthest away was probably about 3 miles from my landing site. John Young was the driver and I was the navigator. And I had a set of maps, and I navigated him over to point A, point B, or whatever it was. And we always left our tracks. The rover was 4-wheel drive and 4-wheel steering, and there was a handle between the seats. I'm in the passenger side, John's on the driver's side. You push forward, and off you go forward. And the tires were made out of wire. And it was an amazing little car. We were the second flight to use the car, and it was sporty, as you can imagine. It down here on the Earth, it weighed about, about 600, 700 pounds. But up on the moon, it weighed 1/6 that. And so to get up, we deployed the car, and it was pointed underneath the rover, underneath the lunar module. So John got on his side, and I got on my side. We just picked it up and walked off with it. And you really felt like Superman up there. I picked up my car. So we got it armed up, if you will, powered up, and we drove probably a total of 17 miles while we were up there, and during the 3 days that we explored the moon. We were there for 72 hours, and we had 3 excursions. That meant we slept. We split the time up into 3 24-hour days, 3 times outside, take off your suit, refurbish the backpack, put up a hammock, go to sleep, and then you start over again, and basically. We didn't want to come home. We were having so much fun. And the only time I felt right at home, if you will, because we've studied these photographs of our landing site that have been taken from lunar orbit by Apollo 14. So we knew exactly where we were and exactly where our objectives were for the geology exploration. And so it made me feel like at home. Oh yeah, here's that mountain, Stone Mountain off the right, North Ray Crater, and we knew what it was out west. And so I was as I said, I was the navigator, John drove. We had a set of maps that said go 270 for 2 kilometers, turn left, and whatever the map said, you just obeyed the map. So it was a great experience to see this moonscape. And you can imagine as you drove across this rough terrain, it bounced a lot in the front, and it began to skid on this loose soil, which was actually, as I said, pulverized rock. There's no dirt on the moon, just rock. The moon's just one big rock, been pounded by meteors, and now is covered with this very, very fine dust. And so we collected about 260 pounds of rock during our stay. The last 3 missions were three days each, and so those missions in Apollo, of the last 3, collected most of the rocks, as you can imagine. And we sampled and brought them all back, and a lot of them still in Houston being analyzed. And when I got back, NASA said, they said, well, we're going to give you a rock. Well, it took them 40 years to give us a rock. But then they said, we're going to give you one, but you got to give it away. And so I went to a prep school in St. Petersburg, Florida, called Admiral Farragut Academy. It was the only way I could get to the Naval Academy was to go off to prep school, boys boarding school back then. And of the 12 of us walked on the moon, 2 of us graduated from Admiral Farragut Academy, Alan Shepard and myself. So I gave my rock to them, and it's now on display in St. Petersburg, Florida. Anyway, it was a tremendous experience. I wanted to go back again, so we volunteered for Apollo 17 backup. And John didn't want to do it, but I said, come on now, let's do it. And he said, what's a dead-end job? What are you going to do after that? And I said, John, they might break their leg and we get to go again. So, hey, that's a good idea. So they didn't break their leg and we didn't get to go again, but it was that was the idea anyway. It was so exciting, the training and all that. So I want to give a chance for questions from the audience, from you all, and it was a tremendous experience for me. We came back from the moon, and we hit the atmosphere. We were going 25,000 miles an hour, and a big fireball around the spacecraft as we re-entered. We safely landed in the South Pacific, about 2,000 miles, I think, south of Hawaii. And all of Apollo landed in the Pacific Ocean on parachutes. And the vehicle, you didn't want to land on land because we didn't have any cushion. The water gave you a good cushion, so it made a big splash. And we had a strong wind, so it pulled us over, and we were upside down and hanging in our seats, looking at the fish swim by. And so I pushed in a circuit breaker, Mattingly turned on a switch, and we started an air pump that pumped up 3 airbags on the now underwater, and when they inflated it, it flipped us back over, and now we're right side up and we could get out. And we didn't have any quarantine, so the Navy SEALs or rescue team, they came and knocked on the door, and we waved, and they said, open the door, so we opened up and got out and got in the helicopter, and mission over, mission complete. As I said, I was the 10th man on the moon. There were 2 more on Apollo 17. So of the 12 of us who walked on the moon, only 4 of us left alive. And I'm still the youngest. And about 4 months. So Jack Smith from Apollo 17, Buzz Aldrin from Apollo 11, 94 I think now, and let's see, Dave Scott from Apollo 15 is still alive, and he's in his 90s. So I turned 90 this year, and so we're all going to be over 90. And hopefully, Artemis, now we're going to have a successful flight in the next couple of years, and we'll be back on the moon. A lot of people want to know, why did we wait so long to go back? Well, the idea was, first off, when Apollo was so successful, they canceled the last 3 missions and decided to build the space shuttle, which was this airplane that went into space. And that took all the money. And then after that, they had the space station, which is still up there, and it took the budget. And so now we're back to Artemis, back now to looking at the moon again. And so hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll have our first crew successfully land on the moon. Okay, let's have some questions. I think we got about 10 or 15 minutes to go here. And you want me to sit down? I don't want to sit down. I'll stand up. What do you want me to do?
They'll ask some questions.
Okay.
Oh, we already have people saying.
Any questions?
Go ahead.
Yes, with the story being so exceptional, how stressful was it though?
I'm sorry, you were muffled. What was the question?
How stressful was the journey to get up to the moon?
When are we? I'm sorry.
How stressful was the journey to the moon?
How stressful? How stressful?
What? Stressful. John Shepard hit a golf ball. So that was his big finale on the moon. Apollo 15 had a Newtonian experiment, hammer and a feather, and they hit the ground at the same time. So we were going to do the Moon Olympics, and the Olympics were in Munich in August of 1972. So we were going to do the high jump record, try to set the high jump and do the long jump. So with all my gear on, up there I weighed 60 pounds. And the backpack weighed as much as I did, so you'd watch the astronauts, we walked with bent over because of the center of gravity. So we started to bounce. And I jumped, and when I did, I straightened up. And see, he went backwards and over, I went like this. And I said, I'm in trouble. And it's the only moment I had fear. But fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. If you get fear and you panic, you can be in real deep trouble. So the thought occurred to me, roll right. And so I rolled right and broke my fall on my right side, bounced onto my back, and my heart was pounding. And I said, but I'm still alive. And because my backpack breaks you dead like that. So I'm still alive, and John comes running over and looks down and says, that wasn't very smart, Charlie. And I said, well, help me up. So he helped me up, and I looked up and the TV camera was pointed right at me. And Mission Control, Dottie was in Mission, my wife was in Mission Control in the viewing area, and she said they were really upset. And that ended the Moon Olympics, by the way. And I learned something very important. Never do anything in space you hadn't practiced down here. Next question. I'm sorry, my hearing is really bad. I got these hearing aids and it reverberates, so if you speak slowly and clearly, hopefully I can understand you. Go ahead, son.
So, given your time serving on Apollo 11, given your time serving as Capcom during Apollo 11, can you explain what emotions were like when it came time for Neil and Buzz to leave the lunar surface? Because I guess given your last statement, never do anything in space that you haven't practiced on the ground. As far as I'm understanding, that had never been tried before, as far as the lunar module leaving the lunar surface of the docking with the command module. So, I guess, could you just explain what emotions were like on ground and how y'all were feeling about it?
I'm sorry.
So what were your emotions while you were in mission control?
Emotionally, I felt all the time on the moon. I felt very secure. I wasn't worried about the suit hanging together, and emotionally, it was wonder and awe, and the experience. I just couldn't get over it. I'm on the moon, and the beauty of it, and the terrain, and all of the stuff that we were going to have to see or get to see and do felt right at home, and I just felt like this training that I've done is the study of the photographs.
I just want to be close to you to be sure that you understand the question.
Okay.
I will repeat it. Okay?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, you do that. I get a lot of my hearing aids. I get a lot of reverberation in this big room like this. Okay, next question. Yes, son.
What was the first thing you wanted to do in zero G?
What was the first thing that went?
What was the first thing you wanted to try in zero G?
What was the first thing that you tried when you went zero G?
When I first got to zero G, we were in Earth orbit, and I felt a little like I better not move very fast. I might throw up. The other two guys just poured out of their seats and didn't have a problem, but I was very careful. Fortunately, I didn't have a big job to do then. I was just copying stuff so I could stay strapped in. it took about 2 hours for me to adjust, and then I was okay. I never did feel like seasick or nobody threw up in our flights. Fortunately.
So the other question was, what were the emotions when Apollo 11 landed and you were in mission control?
It was very tense in mission control. As I said, we were running out of fuel. But when I heard Buzz Aldrin say, contact, engine stop, we knew they were on the ground. So the tension in mission control just evaporated like popping a big balloon that just went out. And then, so I was so excited I couldn't even pronounce tranquility. It came out twang.
Yeah,
And I corrected myself. I said, Roger, tranquility, we copy on the ground. We got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. And really it was. The tension was just immense. So when we heard engine stop, we knew they were on the ground. And so the tension just sort of evaporated and we started cheering and it was a big celebration. And then the flight director got everybody back to work because if we'd have sprung a leak in any of the tanks when we landed, we had to lift off right away so we get back into orbit. But the spacecraft held together and there was no problem, so they were able to stay the full 24 hours. About 24 hours they were on the moon. Next question. Who's not there?
Good morning, sir. I guess I was wondering, how involved are the individual astronauts in the planning and administration, like during the Apollo program? Are you real involved in the planning, or is it administration tells you what to do and you just figure out how to execute it?
You're still involved in administration, NASA, makes me
I'm not officially involved. I consult with some of the contractors, but NASA has not, except for briefing some of the crews. I've talked to state, gone back to Houston and talked to several of the crews that are scheduled to fly to the moon on Artemis, and we just talk about. They have questions about what should I look out for, and where should I concentrate on my training and things like that. So I think I'm the only one that really is involved in things like that have been on the moon. The other three guys basically are retired and they don't travel too much as I do. So I'm the only one that is right now is have an opportunity to speak to the crews that are already in training, and I try to give them if they have a question they can call me and I can ask them. They're training pretty well, and they got a sort of like Apollo for the first 3 landings, and honestly that the trajectories and all are very different, and the landings are going to be down here at the South Pole. Because if there's water on the moon, it's down at the South Pole in the form of ice. The trajectories down there, they land, and the sun never gets above about 2 degrees above the horizon. And if you look at the photographs, it's very bright in the sunlight, but very deep shadows, unlike what we had when we landed at the equator. Next question.
Did it feel weird whenever you started to launch?
Does it feel weird when?
Whenever you started to launch?
Does it feel weird when you're about to launch?
No, it doesn't feel weird. You're strapped in and you're ready to launch, and what you're thinking about and hoping is keep counting, because you only have 4 hours to get off, and if you didn't get off in that 4 hours, you had to wait another 30 days to launch in Apollo. And so the idea was keep counting, please keep counting. I've trained 2 years for this, please keep counting. And so everybody was in our spacecraft, we were ready to go, and the windows were covered over so we couldn't see outside, and we were just listening to the countdown. And so they kept counting, and we lifted off right on the second, and we were on our way. The Saturn V, you watch it, and it's a lot of fire and a big rocket. It's, you know, 6 million pounds it weighed, and the engines were pushing 7.5 million pounds. And the only problem was that it shook. It was 360 feet tall, and you're up at the top. These engines are moving at the bottom, and you're shaking like crazy from side to side. And you don't hear any noise, but you just get this vibration from side to side. And that lasted for the whole first stage, and after that it was very smooth. And Mission Control says you go, you go, you go. We never had a failure in a Saturn V, not one. And so it was a very reliable rocket. Next question.
Could you explain the physics of the slingshot effect and how it impacted your fuel efficiency?
The physics of
The slingshot effect.
the physics of the slingshot effect and how it happens.
Oh, the orbit was designed so that it took 3 days to get to the moon, and that was because of the fuel budget we had. You had to have enough fuel to slow down when you got there, go into orbit, maneuver, and enough fuel to get out and come back. And the trajectory was, so that, with our fuel budget, it was a 72-hour trip to the moon. We had enough fuel to go in, slow down, get into orbit, and orbiting fuel, and then we had enough to get out of orbit for a 3-day trip home. And the trajectory was designed for the fuel budget. I mean, you can get to the moon in 12 hours, but you're going so fast when you get there, you don't have enough fuel to get slow down. So if that was the idea of your question, we were on a trajectory that was like shooting a shotgun. You got to get the lead, and we came in and got into orbit and orbited, and then it was a 3-day trip back, and the outbound and the return were such that it was called free return. If you didn't go into orbit and you just whipped around the moon, it was going to bring you right back to Earth. And so that was called a free return trajectory. And for Apollo, it took 3 days to get there and 3 days to get back, and enough fuel to maneuver while you were in orbit. Next, I think we got enough. Couple of minutes now. Another question.
Hi.
Hi.
So, quick question for you. I know a lot of people are kind of wondering in the new age of like space exploration. What are your thoughts on like SpaceX compared to like NASA and stuff like that? You know, what are your thoughts on that work?
How do you compare SpaceX with NASA?
I'm very excited about SpaceX. They are it was a very successful partnership with NASA. When it started, I said, why are we doing this? But I changed my mind real quick, because SpaceX was, what happened is SpaceX and Blue Origin and others came to NASA and says, this is what we got, you want to buy it? And NASA analyzed it and said, yeah, we buy it. So they gave them $1 billion to get them started, and SpaceX has been tremendously successful. And most of the satellites now and the manned stuff is going up. Most of them are going up on SpaceX. There's been 1 or 2 on Starliner, but that's it. And so I think our partnership with SpaceX and Blue Origin and the others has paid big dividends, and it was a good idea. You know, NASA never built anything. We had requirements. We need a lunar module, and this is what it's supposed to do. And so we had bids from various countries. Well, SpaceX came to us and said, this is what we got. You want to buy it? And they said, yeah, we'll buy that one. and we'll buy this one from Blue Origin. So he gave them enough money to wrap up, and by far the most successful is SpaceX. So it's been very good for us. Anybody got we got more questions?
One more question.
Did you have somebody on the spaceship with you?
Can you bring somebody in the spaceship with you? Can you bring somebody in the spaceship with you? Can you bring somebody?
No. The spacecraft was, Apollo it carried 3 people. And I took a picture of my family that I left on the moon. And in our flight plan, my wife and my kids had some drawings and little notes and stuff like that. So we had some relationship, but they couldn't talk. They could listen to our conversation with Mission Control, but they couldn't talk. I mean, they didn't want, NASA didn't want your wife calling up, hey, to wash your robe or something. So they could hear us from my house. They had a little speaker. They could hear Mission Control. They could hear us responding, but they couldn't respond. One of the funny things, I had a twin brother. He passed away a few years ago, but it's an identical twin brother, and he's in the viewing area at Mission Control when I'm on the moon, and there in a big TV screen, you see me bouncing around on the moon. Well, my brother's a doctor, was a doctor, so the flight surgeon said, well, Dr. Duke, why don't you come down here and observe your brother's medical condition? So he walks in the Mission Control, an identical twin. And they say they look at me on the moon, and they look over there, and they didn't know what to believe. So finally the flight director said, hey, this is his twin brother. That's really him. Okay, 2 more questions maybe, or 1 more. Yeah, who's got the microphone? Okay.
Is there a Bible on the moon?
Is it what?
A Bible on the moon?
A Bible?
We didn't have one, but yes, there was a microfilm Bible that was taken to the moon and landed on Apollo 14, and it was brought back. There were scriptures quoted on the lunar surface by Apollo 15. Jim Irwin was a committed Christian. I was in church at that point, but I wasn't a believer. I just had a mental concept of who Jesus was. But after the flight, my wife became a believer and I became a Christian. And so now we are involved in Christian ministry. But as far as a Bible on the moon, there's not. There was one taken to the moon and was brought back. We had Buzz Aldrin had a communion on the moon on Apollo 11. Apollo 15 scripture was quoted, and it was one other instrument. I can't remember right now, but we didn't have time. Oh, I know. Apollo 8 read scripture from orbit the first time they read it. So there was honoring God in Apollo. There was nothing against it, but there was nothing positive that they said you got to do this. So it was all individual support. One more. Yeah.
What would you do to share your faith, or what have you done to share your faith?
Without the microphone.
What would you do to share your faith, or what have you done to share your faith?
When I got back from the moon, I was 36, and by the time Apollo was over, I turned 37, and I climbed the ladder of success. I was a colonel in the Air Force, and I was really successful. What are you going to do now? How are you going to top that? And so a lot of astronauts had that problem, especially the moonwalkers. So I decided, a couple of years later, I decided that I'd just take my eyes off the moon and put them on money. And I left the active Air Force. We moved to New Braunfels, and I became a businessman. And but my marriage was falling apart. It was really bad. And so my wife was on the verge of suicide. And some people came to our church, they called Faith Alive, and they shared their faith, just 10 minutes, simple testimonies. And my wife realized, you know, I've tried everything but Jesus. And so she said, Jesus, come into my heart. And when she said that, she began to change. And 2 years later, I watched a change in her life. And we moved to New Braunfels. And so I went to a Bible study at T-Bar-M Tennis Ranch. And I made a decision, you know, Jesus is really who he says he is, or this is a big liar. Make up your mind. So we all get a chance to make up our mind. And so I decided after that weekend, I said, Lord, I really believe, come into my life. And for the first time in my life, I experienced the peace of God. And that was such a transformation for us and for our family. Our boys came to the Lord about a year later. And it was so dramatic that we weren't asking for invitations, but invitations were coming to us. And so we started doing a lot of Christian ministry, and we still do. We've been all over the world sharing our faith, and it's been a very, very blessed time for us to be able to share the goodness of God. And so we really look forward to opportunities to share our faith. So I don't know who had started this, but anyway, I'm glad I got to start.
We're gonna get a standing ovation. Woo! I do too.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.